Welcome to the K-Factor podcast, where we turn up the heat on all things fire protection. Brought to you by the American Fire Sprinkler Association, this podcast sparks conversations about the latest technology, trends, and tools shaping the industry. Join the AFSA tech team as we fan the flames of innovation in fire safety.
Welcome to another episode of the K-Factor podcast. I'm here with Andy with Potter. Thanks for being on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Welcome to Potter. So I hope you've had a good time this week. I know you've seen a lot of our training labs and things around the office, and a couple of locations. I know that you got a tour of the plant.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, terrific. Great. Yeah. So, I hope there's been lots of interesting stuff that you were able to see while you were here. Maybe get a little bit of history of Potter. And
for sure. The one thing I noticed that is interesting, you've got alarm people and sprinkler people in the same building.
We do.
And it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so Potter's been in the business, in the fire protection business, I should say, in the life safety business since 1898. That's when the business was started. The gentleman Charles Potter started here in St. Louis, and it started as a central station, really. And so it wasn't until sometime in the early 70s that they started building, tamper devices, pressure devices, flow devices, and that's kind of how Potter built its business. And then it was not too long after that they sold off the central station part of the business, and we were solely a manufacturer. It wasn't until sometime in the early 2000s whenever Potter started developing its own fire alarm side of the business, and that's grown exponentially over the last probably say 15-20 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
you could actually probably hear some of the alarm classes,
some of the training and the classes next door. So here in this building, and this is our corporate office. So this houses everybody that pretty much runs the business. So no R&D, none of the software guys for the fire alarm business. But this is all the day-to-day brains of the operation in this building. But the training labs are also in this building. So the sprinkler lab, which is where we're in today, and then next door to us is the fire alarm training lab. So there's always something going along here. So people from all over the country, North America really, are in here for trainings at least 3 weeks out of the month, I would guess.
What's your role here?
So I'm the VP of Sales for the suppression side for the Americas. So I have the responsibility for pretty much this hemisphere as it relates to the sprinkler division.
Okay.
But we do work pretty closely with a lot of the fire alarm salespeople as well. What's interesting about our business is as the fire sprinkler contractors start to become more sophisticated, they, much like us, want to grow their business, and the next logical step for them a lot of times is fire alarm. And so we do tend to work pretty closely with the fire alarm team.
What's your secret?
Oh gosh, to working close with the fire alarm team? You know what? We have a great legacy at Potter in supporting our customers, and so what's interesting about the fire alarm side and the sprinkler side is there's so few similarities, other than maybe how some of our devices talk to their devices. And so I would say the secret is being kind of open-minded and just having a thirst for knowledge and wanting to learn more about their side of the business and how the two kind of coexist. But.
And I've looked at your Potter University, and what other courses or what are you supporting here for training?
Well, on the suppression side, I think most people are interested in the new products that we're building, and so everybody's probably been exposed to the flow, pressure, and tamper devices at one time or another. And embarrassingly or not, a lot of that technology doesn't change, entirely too much. But maybe some of the materials change and things like that, but otherwise it's remained largely unchanged. But as the industry progresses, right, there's all kinds of new opportunities for us to be able to build in value into our products. And so whether it's like the auto test pressure switch, I think looking into the future, that's where most of the advances are going to take place, is in data collection and learning more about the systems and offering people different ways to test their sprinkler systems, right? I mean, we always hear in our industry that if a sprinkler system fails, it's most likely because there was a valve closed somewhere. Right. And so being able to know the position of those valves remotely, being able to be notified if it does change, those are some of the advances that we think are people are asking for, and different building owners and property managers are asking for. So for us, the advancements are really going to be more into that connected devices, the Internet of Things. A lot of the fire alarm platforms use this IP-based internet connectivity to be able to interact with the panels. And so we've been really fortunate to have some talented engineers and some software developers, and we take some of that technology and blend it in with some of our fire sprinkler products, and I think that's what makes us unique there versus all the other folks in the world that are trying to do the same things we are.
So the auto test, the pressure switch, what does that look like? Because I think a lot of times on the contractor side, or people that might be listening, don't really, I wouldn't say they don't understand manufacturing,
Sure.
but it's not really their day-to-day. From like concept, how does it start here and then end up with a product and kind of move out?
Right. So at Potter, our product development folks are really fire protection people, right? And so they understand the contracting side of the business. They understand how contractors make their money, and how that reoccurring revenue for inspection, testing, and maintenance makes up a big part of their business. And so we will try to advance products, right, rather than just simple mechanical pressure switches, and try to combine a few things. So one, it's really both a high and low alarm switch. It also has some room temperature switch capabilities inside. It is web enabled, so it can output some of that information.
Yeah.
But I think what's the biggest benefit to that product is its ability to test those switches, both high and low switch simultaneously, and using just the smallest amount of air to be able to do that. And it's programmable, so it's really quick, really easy to be able to set that test up. And especially with the advents of some of the new valves, some of the lower pressure valves, testing a switch can be delicate, right, if you're not careful, and you could inadvertently trip the system, which is of course something that nobody wants to do.
Not a good day. Yeah.
So
especially on Friday.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. Friday, 4 o'clock, and that happens. It's a nightmare for not only the building owner, but the contractor and probably the fitter that's
Maybe
there
tech
too.
services.
And maybe tech services. But the idea is to be able to create a value proposition, to be able to make ITM less expensive, and to make it a little bit quicker, and then also just to maybe protect against some things that might happen that we're not hoping to see. But.
And and then it gets into manufacturing, and like, what does that look like? You're here in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've got other facilities, but that's a big step to make sure that this product's getting out when people need them. These products are kind of early in their
launch, right? So the adaptation of it tends to be more the mission critical installations right now. So I'll say things like data centers and freezer storage, maybe some high value manufacturing like semiconductor and those sort of things. So for us, manufacturing the device is pretty simple and straightforward. Obviously we design all the electronics and the software here, but the building of the circuit boards is not something that we're really good at, right? So we use vendors that are experts in circuit board manufacturing. Of course, they're not far from here. I would say they're local, but the rest of it is assembly here in St. Louis. But I think where the magic really happens is all the automated testing, and I think you probably saw some of that this week while you were here. And the computerization of the testing portion of it, right? There is, of course, the mechanical threaded connections that we test for integrity, but the rest of it's really all done by computer. So it's pretty neat to see it come together. And the testing, like I said, it just kind of fits into a test bed, and then the computer takes over and it measures all of its inputs and outputs, and it's operating the way it's supposed to, and it's got the right software revision, and we give it its blessing, and out the door it goes.
That's one thing when we were over at the manufacturing site, everyone was so happy. It seemed like everyone, that just culturally, it was, and it was impressive on how many steps there were with manual, taking a look, making sure quality checks, and the pressure test was something that was eye-opening to me.
Yeah, and even something like our flow switches, which we make every day, right? That's something that's our we call it our core business. We call it our bread and butter. But every single one of those switches is tested on a test bank, so it sees water. Right, and so we make sure that things aren't leaking. We make sure that time delay works right. Make sure that there's no shorts inside the micro switches, and it's a world-class manufacturing facility. And I think a lot of the reason why people are so happy here at Potter is we've got two types of employees. We've got employees that have been here for 20 years,
Yeah.
and we've got the new hires that have been here for a couple of years.
Right.
And so, as we grow, people don't usually tend to leave. We are a private equity-owned company, but everybody in the business has an ownership share of the business. And so even, the guys that are, taking out the trash and mopping the floors, they're excited because, ultimately at some point in the not so distant future, everybody's going to see that happen.
Yeah.
It's going to positively affect them, one way or another. So, but, I think what makes the difference is we actively go out of our way to help educate the folks that are on the floor about what our products do and how important they are in the world and protecting lives and property. And so I think at the end of the day, people feel pride in knowing that the products that they make are doing important work. They're protecting people, they're protecting lives and property, and we're not just making widgets and toaster ovens.
Yeah, it's an easy buy-in at that point.
Totally, right? I mean, it feels good to know that the things that you do are really important in their impact on people's lives.
One thing that is very random, but I noticed someone was applying the stickers to the pressure switches.
Yeah.
I'll never look at the pressure switch sticker again. I mean, sometimes you're a little rough with those things.
All right.
and you start knocking them around a little bit.
Right.
But there's a little more appreciation. I'll be a little bit more.
That's exactly right. So everything in the manufacturing process has a purpose, right? And so, we want people to know that whenever they see a product, they recognize it, And so, the stickers have to be in the same place.
Yeah.
There has to be, the print has to be with within a certain, DPI, and so, everything's really taken care of. It's interesting because, if you look at one of our products, whether it's a new ITM product, right, like the outer test ITM or any one of the nitrogen pieces of equipment, I think what's interesting is there's nothing that's inside of those things that was decided upon arbitrarily.
Right.
So whether it's a material or a dimension or where a label is actually stuck to a device, and that was all. Believe me, there was a lot of thought gone into exactly where that label is going to be placed on that device. So nothing is arbitrary.
Yeah. Attention to detail.
Attention to detail. That's it.
So can you allude more about the auto test pressure switch, the high temperature, low temperature thing? I mean, I just feel like a lot of times on the ITM side, it's not thought of unless it's an obvious.
Sure.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So we have manufactured a product called the room temperature switch for years and years.
Yeah.
And so it was really combining a lot of that functionality into one device. And so obviously the pressure switch typically on dry and pre-action systems that we see those switches installed, but to be able to add a little bit more functionality into it with the room temperature switch. So if we see approaching freezing conditions, right, that's something that's important to know. And so this gives us another alarm. So I think when we're looking at the future of monitoring of sprinkler systems, we're trying to find ways that we can move beyond some of the really analog devices, right? Because many things are moving more into this connected space. I mentioned the Internet of Things, and a lot of the stuff that the fire alarm team is doing is really pretty interesting when it comes to the electronics and its connectivity and being able to utilize some of our products like IntelliView and to be able to monitor your equipment across the world. So because we have data center operators that operate out of the United States and they have data centers in Asia, for example. And so they want to be able to look at their systems and make sure that they're working properly and that there's no issues as far as maintaining them or when something needs service. And so a lot of our customers really appreciate those things. And I mean, if you look now, I mean, almost everything's connected. Your garage door opener at home is probably connected to the internet. And so I think at some point in the future, all of these products are probably just going to be sensors on a sprinkler system, and maybe one day it'll talk to the cloud and you'll be able to interact with all those things through your smartphone or tablet. And so I think what we're doing today is kind of laying the groundwork for that. Kind of what the future might see.
ITM wise, I think we forget sometimes the contractors doing inspection testing that these aren't our systems.
Right.
We're contracted to deal with these systems, and then we get frustrated, I think, when the piece of equipment doesn't work because it's not maintained.
Correct.
So this is a really important step of data acquisition for that end user to start that true preventative maintenance.
Absolutely, and I think that it's a real opportunity for a contractor to be able to sell himself and his business as somebody that's an expert in in fire safety and fire sprinkler, and that it gives them an opportunity to maybe show that they have some knowledge and capability that their competitors don't have.
Yeah.
And it's especially as people become more sophisticated with their buildings. When we were getting into corrosion, helping kind of develop that market for fire sprinkler, it was something that was born from our. We noticed when we would talk to building owners or property developers or property managers that they never really knew how much their fire sprinkler systems cost them to own.
Right.
And so if you own a building, like this building we're in here, every year there's some level of maintenance, there's some level of repair that has to happen with that sprinkler system. And so we noticed that a lot of those folks didn't know that. It was all rolled into a building maintenance budget. And when we started having these conversations, you could see the light bulbs go off, and they would think to themselves, well, I should know how much it costs. And then the value proposition was easy to see. If I could save you, let's just say 15% a year in your maintenance costs, over time, that really accounts for a large savings. And the same thing goes for ITM, right? I mean, these are building systems, just like your HVAC is, just like your hot water is and your electricity. The difference is when you go to wash your hands here and you don't have hot water, it's a mild inconvenience. But if you're trying to get out of a building that it's on fire and your fire sprinkler system's not working properly, the cost of failure is a lot bigger. So, we see this as a way for us not only to just supply a need to the sprinkler industry, but to really help contractors be able to further their business and know that they have a partner that understands what it's like to inspect these systems and test these systems, and what's required, and maybe where some of the things that we could design into our products that might help a contractor make a little bit more money or be a little bit more effective. And
they do it on the everyday. I mean, if you think about your car for maintenance, your tire pressure's low, pops up on your phone. Hey, you might want to take a look at that. Same kind of concept here.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's just to give people kind of an advance, notice if there was loss of power, right? We didn't have heat in the riser room. It's important to know those things before you find out the hard way.
Right. So what does the interface do for us? The buttons and
so obviously our products are installed in dark areas, right? So you're trying to make things a little bit more visible, so it's easy to see when you're in a dark riser room. But we also try to make them really as simple as possible, and also to try to keep costs as low as possible. So the display is not a fancy liquid crystal display where we have animations and things on it. Although that stuff is really cool, I don't think anybody really wants to pay for that when it's tucked away in a dark riser room. So as far as interfacing with it, right? There's a pretty simple menu as far as the operations and things that we want to be able to perform, whether it's the testing or whether we want to just pull some information from it. But I mean, it's super easy to use. I know we're used to a lot of touch screens and things like that. We intentionally, those are expensive, but we intentionally try to make it easy to use. Because the more moving parts there is, the more opportunity is there for things to break. So one of the things that Potter's been, we've tried to have people think about us as high quality, best in class, best customer service, best technical support, and so we try to do a lot. Try to design a lot of those things into the products as well.
So you're expanding a lot too, right?
100%. Yeah, we are growing very very quickly. Most of our push to grow for the business has been internationally. We enjoy a very big footprint here in North America, but the rest of the world understands Potter. They recognize the brand, but we're definitely not the biggest kid in the room.
Right. So
that's been our big push over the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years, has been growth internationally. And so we have a second brand, Safe Signal. And Safe Signal is what we're really, using to compete in those markets around the world, whether it's, Southeast Asia or the Middle East or South America, Eastern Europe. This has been the place that we've kind of, focused on for growth, has been the Safe Signal products. But
what's the challenge been to go international, since codes and standards may be spotty on enforcement's different? What have you noticed?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest challenge internationally has been codes and standards and the adoption of NFPA. So where we do see that not as big a step is when we have maybe Western investment in parts around the world. We've got some European investors, right, and they demand a higher level of craftsmanship and design in their fire systems. I think that's probably been the biggest, because not everywhere around the world requires fire sprinklers. Right. Maybe fire alarms a little bit different. They're a little bit ahead as far as that's concerned, but not with fire sprinkler. However, where we are seeing that, in certain parts of the world where there's more people coming to visit from around the world, and they want to be able to bring a little bit higher, safety to these buildings. So I'm thinking, countries like the UAE, cities like Dubai, they host a lot of, international conferences and exhibits, and people from all over the world come there, and everybody wants to make sure that they have a little bit nicer property or a little bit nicer experience. And so that's where we start to see, more of the Western fire codes being adopted, maybe some, higher standards as far as installation of, fire sprinkler systems. But, what we want to do is not just sell somebody a product. Right. We want to build awareness, and we want to build adoption of some of the fire safety principles that we know work, and just kind of what we call spread the gospel upon.
Yeah.
It. So.
Yeah. And what about the Latin America? Because that seems to be spotty as well.
Yeah, I would say Mexico is by far the biggest opportunity in Latin America. Certainly there's more investment in Mexico, being that they share a border with us. It's easy to travel into and be able to be part of construction and kind of spreading awareness and education of fire safety. Once we get into South America, I think probably some of the more fully developed countries, Argentina, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Brazil is still there's not as much regulatory as far UL, FM. A lot of those things aren't required. But again, when you see some more of the the bigger developments, outside investors, right? They require a different level of fire safety, different level of codes and standards.
So a lot of those individual, entities want to protect their property, is what you're getting at.
Absolutely.
Whether you're here or if you're in who knows where.
Sure. I mean, those are big investments, right? If you look into South America, like in Brazil and Chile, so there's a lot of paper. A lot of mining, right? So these are big capital investment rich businesses, and so they want to protect those as well. Yeah. And then when you get around, certain parts of the Caribbean coast, whether it's in South America or up through Mexico, we do have a lot of hospitality, right? And you vacation in the Caribbean, and so a lot of those hotels and resorts are from outside investors, and so they require kind of a higher level of fire safety. So the good news is it's moving in the right direction. Right. We're starting to see more legislation around requiring fire sprinkler systems, and so that's good for us. It's good for an industry. But I think from a perspective of how things are growing, I think they're following right along with the U.S.'s lead and NFPA, and that's becoming more and more of like a standard rather than the fringe anymore. So
more international.
Moving in the right direction.
So what do you have? Without going too far, what do you got up your sleeve? What is
correct? Yeah. So again, I would say a lot of what we're doing for the future is going to be kind of in and around some auto ITM capabilities, right? Increasing our connectivity with our devices so we know more about the operation and condition of the sprinkler system. I think that'll be something that you'll see over the next few years, and then some advancements that we have with the nitrogen products as well. A lot more functionality, a lot more integration with our IntelliView, web-based applications, and so people are going to be able to, connect their fire systems, connect their sprinkler systems, and be able to see it kind of all in one place.
So you said IntelliView a couple times.
I did.
What is that?
So IntelliView is a web-based app that we use. It's also an app that you can download for your phone, but it's a tool. Yeah. It's basically a interface or a dashboard that you can use for different fire panels or nitrogen generators. It's a place where you can go and look at your entire building system and be able to get all the information that you need about how things are behaving and what's been turned on and what's been turned off.
Temperatures.
Everything above, all the above.
That's awesome. So I'm excited to. It's kind of the timing's been great to sit with your sales team as well as the classes going on.
It's been great having you here, and I hope that I know Potter's involved in a lot of things, in the industry, especially with the AFSA. But it's always fun to be able to show off our labs and our buildings, and being able to take people to see where the products are made. And I think people usually come away feeling a little overwhelmed of how sophisticated the operation is. But you know what? I would be remiss if I didn't say that we feel like we're best in class. We do it better than anybody else, and we do it all over the world. So
it shows for sure. Yeah. Do you have anything with the nitrogen generators? I know you got the wall mount units.
Correct. So you're just kind of looking back at Potter's involvement in the corrosion business. I started at Potter in 2000, and in those early 2000s, right, we were just getting involved with testing of sprinkler systems for corrosion, certain types of corrosion, being able to measure that kind of thing. We were started off with the air vents, and then we were instrumental in helping build that requirement into code. And then as the generators began to develop, we started to learn a whole lot more about deploying them into fire sprinkler. And I think what's unique about Potter is this is our life safety is our business. We don't make thermostats for your house. We don't make systems for we don't do HVAC or anything else. So this is where we live and play every day, is in life safety. And so the development of the generators specifically for fire protection and understanding the demands of fire sprinkler systems and how that impacts the design of the generators, I think is really kind of what helped us sort of propel that into the future. We've done a lot of things over the years where we've tried different things and realized that maybe it wasn't working the way we thought it was, or that it wasn't really a viable business, and so we would exit that and move on to something else. So if people have followed Potter and its adaptation of corrosion over the years, they'll certainly see a progression. And then the latest is the intelligent nitrogen systems, of course, and that's again web enabled, and so you can get on IntelliView and connect your systems and be able to control them and send it text messages and ask it questions about how long is it running, and how long is it off? Is it turning on and off more frequently? Is it making the purity of nitrogen that it's supposed to? And so, there's a lot of work going on in the background with AI, and maybe how it can take some of the data that we're feeding it and been able to do some predictive maintenance about your systems. And so there's a lot of neat stuff going on in the background. And so I think as we get further into the future, there'll be a lot more connectivity, and I think there'll be a lot more use of AI and how to kind of parse that data up and been able to provide us some useful information.
That's what the nitrogen generators that I noticed teaching the ITM classes frequently is, like, technology's great, but you got to maintain it.
Yeah.
Right. So that you see the digital readouts of the percentages, and then of course a lot of your training and learning and ours. It's kind of a cumulative effort to give everyone the information they need to maintain it.
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge for us as an industry is getting people to see their fire systems as an integral part of their building.
Yeah.
I know when the air conditioner's out in the summer, it's super easy to notice, right? And it makes everybody uncomfortable. But I think it's more important to look at these systems as an integral part of your systems or your building's health. And I think with that a little bit. What's the adage? A pound of prevention's worth, or an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. Yeah. So just a little bit of attention paid to the sprinkler system is something that's really important overall. But I think how we do that, and we make that easy for people, and we make it as inexpensive as possible for people, and I think that's through functionality and the integration of technology into our products is going to be able to help kind of move that forward a little bit.
And then troubleshooting too. I've caught a few in my personal experience with just pressure transducers of, hey, this XYZ site has false trips, and unless you looked at the data and noticed that it had a temperature spike or a pump kicked in, you would never know on a regular day basis. Exactly.
And you know what? I use this example all the time because I feel like it happens this is probably the one issue that happens with dry systems and parking garages more than anything else. Somebody backs a car into a drum drill, and they don't really know it. It doesn't look like there's anything wrong, and they just kind of and they drive off. And what they don't realize is they've inadvertently opened a sizable leak in that sprinkler system. And so we see that in the reporting from the nitrogen systems, right? We see a sudden spike and how often it's turning on and how long it's running. And so that's usually
just kind of crack the valve a little bit.
That's it. And I mean that's the first notification that people get is I'm seeing excessive runtimes. What's going on? A lot of times they think there's a problem with the equipment, but really it's a byproduct of some things that are happening somewhere else in the sprinkler system. But it's those things that I think provide people with a little bit of extra value. And if you're a contractor and you know how to take that little bit of extra value and go sell it to your customers, I think it's great for the industry, and it's great for the look of fire protection. So.
And to your point about the customers getting to know this is an integral piece of their building. I mean, on the unfortunate side is litigation and business continuity. They learn it quickly, but we don't ever want to get to that point.
That's right. And usually the folks that we have worked with that are we would consider power users, and, they've experienced something negative like that, and they know that they're not going to allow that to be a risk for their companies. But that's where we try to educate people as best we can. And talk about those kind of risks. But as fire professionals, amongst ourselves, I mean, of course, it makes great sense. It's communicating that to the masses that really kind of becomes the challenge. But typically in our businesses, well, I should say typically, but unfortunately, we don't see a lot of change until something really bad happens. So that's what we're really trying to help avoid, and at least educate people at large. That I think that we can help them do a better job and help them be safe, without breaking the bank, and maybe being proactive along the way. But.
So I got a kind of a random question for you.
Sure.
A light in the spirit a little bit after those good old fire protection conversations. If you were a piece of monitoring equipment or something in the Potter line that would represent you, what would you be and why?
Well, that's a good question. I really like what we call this skunk works at Potter, right? And it's opportunities that our R&D staff has to play with some ideas, right? And maybe they have some harebrained idea about how we could do some things differently. What if we did this with this product? So if I had one product in our arsenal, and I think it's the coil keeper.
Okay.
And so back in I'll tell you the history of the coil keeper. And so it wasn't until the 2019 reversion of NFPA that required monitoring of the solenoid on a pre-action valve.
Which is crazy. It took that long. But.
Correct. Now, what's interesting about the coil keeper is we developed this idea. This is one of those, hey, what if we could do this? So the way this product really works is it measures the inductance across the coil.
Okay.
And so if you take that coil off, right, it senses there's been a drop in that inductance, and it goes into alarm. We've seen people test, coils with sticking a screwdriver or channel locks through it and then energizing it, right, to see that. But that inductance across one of those tools is not the same thing. So again, we'll see some kind of change in that and sends a signal. So this product was developed, it's probably been like 15 years ago. We were doing this type of skunk works work, and somebody came up with this idea. He's no longer here at Potter, but he's like, what if we were able to do that? So we kind of quickly, put together some prototypes and be able to see that the concept worked and that we could actually, this is going to be a viable product. Well, the problem was it's 12, 15 years ago, and commercially nobody's going to use it, right? It's just not a required product. Yes, it's a great idea, but we put it away in our box of good ideas, but maybe some other day.
We'll circle back,
right? So whenever we saw this was going to be a new requirement, we were able to resurrect that. So I think it's pretty neat, just because it's one of those things that we developed years and years ago, and we do have a box of great ideas, but not really going to go anywhere commercially ideas, and so we kind of keep those hidden, right? And so I think it's a pretty neat product. it's really creative in the way that we've used the electronics to be able to measure that inductance.
And super important.
And I think that's a kind of a really good example of the products that Potter makes. Being able to use technology in an effective way, but a reliable way.
Yeah.
And so this was actually one of the products that was really easy to bring to market because we had all the conceptual, circuitry done, and everything was kind of ready to go.
Make it pretty, right?
And that's it. That's it.
And if you don't have it, I mean, so many. I've walked into a few deluge systems where that thing's just laying there,
just hanging off the.
Never activate.
That's it.
It's impaired.
That's it. No. That's it. So. Great for folks that maybe have some older systems, and want to bring them up to most current day code. It's a great little product. I like that one, and then one that I don't have installed in this lab. It probably is in the fire lab, but our wireless product.
Yeah.
And so that was something that we not so much old idea in a box somewhere. But it was one of those things where how many times have you heard there's been some kind of severing of wiring that goes maybe from a pit that's outside, and there's an OS and Y valve in the pit, and it has to get wired back into the building, and there's a parking lot there now, and nobody's going to dig up the parking lot to be able to wire this tamper switch. So the wireless switch is really pretty cool. So
you can't just blame the alarm guys at Potter.
You can't just blame the alarm guys at Potter. Now what I can say is that not a lot of sprinkler guys put that product in because it's got wires on it.
Okay.
And so to have to wire up the device, but no, it's a really neat product just as far as being able to fix a situation that can be really, really expensive and take a whole lot of time. We've got a few products that can just get installed and pretty quickly in a couple of hours have the problem fixed. So
awesome. Well, I can't wait to take back to our members and in the future and where we're growing as well, trying to make sure that we have as many offerings as we can to support the industry. Information from here, it's been great.
Terrific. Well, we really enjoyed having you here, and hopefully you've seen some things that you don't have in your lab, and we'd love to be able to send you back with some, because I know you guys have a ton of people come through your training facilities, and we'd love to be able to have them have some of the most up-to-date technologies that we've got.
So if you're listening, keep an eye out for those at the lab. And how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so here in St. Louis, you can always hit the 1-800 number, 1-800-325-3936, pottersignal.com. And I'm sure there's one of our salespeople are out running around, and if not, they're going to see at one of the regional AFSA events, of course, the national event as well. So we will. I think we're pretty easy to find.
Yeah.
So.
Fair enough. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Josh. All right.
This has been the Kaempfer Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share wherever you tune in to podcasts, or head over to our website for more. Reach out to us anytime at technical@firesprinkler.org. Stay safe and always learn as we keep the fire protection conversation going.